For almost all of human history, every giant squid a person ever laid eyes on had one thing in common: it was dead. Think about that for a moment. This is the animal behind the Kraken, the legendary sea monster that haunted sailors for centuries. The beast said to rise from the black water, wrap its arms around entire ships, and drag screaming men down into the deep. It is one of the most famous creatures in the history of the world, and yet, until almost the present day, no living human being had ever seen one alive. Not one. Every giant squid we ever found was a corpse, washed up on a beach after a storm, floating limp on the waves, or cut, half digested, out of the belly of a whale. We built one of the greatest monster legends of all time entirely out of dead bodies. And here's the question that should stop you. Why? Why, for hundreds of years, did we only ever find them dead? This isn't a tiny creature. A giant squid can grow longer than a bus. It has the largest eyes of almost any animal on Earth, arms lined with grasping suckers, and a beak that can slice through flesh. Something that enormous shouldn't be able to hide. So why did every single one we ever encountered turn up as a body? The answer is the strangest thing about this animal. Stranger than its size, stranger than the legends. The giant squid only ever came to us dead, because for the giant squid, coming to the surface is death. The top of the ocean, the warm, bright, oxygen-rich water where you and I would happily swim, is, to this creature, the single most dangerous place in the entire sea. More dangerous than the crushing deep. More dangerous even than the monster that hunts it in the dark. The giant squid is, in the most literal biological sense, terrified of the surface. And to understand why, you have to understand that this animal is trapped, sealed inside a narrow band of freezing black water, unable to rise, unable to escape by the very chemistry of its own blood. So there are three questions we need to answer. First, why does the warm water at the surface, the most comfortable water in the ocean, actually kill this animal? Second, why is it trapped down in the freezing dark, unable to leave? And third, if it can never survive the surface, then how? After centuries of legend, did anyone finally manage to see one alive? Let's start with the blood, because everything about this animal's imprisonment begins there. If you were somehow able to cut a giant squid and watch it bleed, you would not see red, you would see blue. The giant squid, like its cousins the octopus and the cuttlefish, has blue blood, and that color is the first clue to the whole mystery. Our blood is red because it carries oxygen using iron in a molecule called hemoglobin. The giant squid doesn't use iron, it uses copper in a molecule called hemocyanin. And when that copper grabs onto oxygen, it turns the blood a deep, vivid blue. Now, this copper-based blood is not some inferior version of ours. In the world the giant squid lives in, it's actually better. Down in the deep ocean, cold, dark, and starved of oxygen, hemocyanin is brilliant at pulling what little oxygen there is out of the water and delivering it to the body. It is precision engineered for the freezing deep. In that environment, blue blood beats red blood. But it has a catch, a fatal, non-negotiable catch. This blood only works in the cold. Warm it up, and it fails, dramatically, catastrophically. As the water gets warmer, the giant squid's blood loses its grip on oxygen. It becomes less and less able to carry what the animal needs to survive. And we don't have to guess about this, because in a rare and extraordinary moment, science got to measure it directly. In 1982, off the coast of Norway, a living giant squid was carried in on a warm current and caught, one of the very few times anyone has ever gotten their hands on a fresh, intact specimen. And a scientist did something no one had been able to do before. He took its blood and he tested how well it carried oxygen at different temperatures. What he found was staggering. When he raised the temperature of that blood from around 6 degrees Celsius, the cold of the deep, up to about 15 degrees, the blood's ability to carry oxygen didn't just drop a little, it collapsed by roughly a factor of 4. Think about what that means. If a giant squid rises out of the cold deep and into warmer water, its own blood essentially stops working. It can no longer pull enough oxygen from the sea to stay alive. And here's the cruelest part of it. The surface water is not oxygen poor, just the opposite. The warm surface layer of the ocean is some of the richest, most oxygen-filled water there is. It's practically swimming in oxygen, but the giant squid can't use any of it. It suffocates in the middle of plenty. It drowns in a sea full of the very thing it's dying for because its blood has gone warm and useless, unable to grab the oxygen surrounding it on every side. Imagine dying of thirst while floating in a lake. That is what the surface does to a giant squid. The warmth itself is the poison. So that answers the first question. The surface kills the giant squid not with cold, not with a predator, but with warmth. Warmth that shuts down its blood and suffocates it in an ocean of air. Which leads directly to the second question and to the trap that this animal can never escape. Because if warm water is lethal, then the giant squid has only one option: stay deep where it's cold. Its home is a band of frigid black water roughly 200 to 1,000 meters down, below the reach of the sun, below the warm surface layer, in the permanent cold and dark. That's not where the giant squid chooses to lurk out of some love for the shadows. That is the only place on Earth where its blood functions. The deep isn't its hiding place. The deep is its life support system, and the animal is built from the inside out for that one specific layer and nowhere else. Take its buoyancy. A creature the size of a giant squid should have to work constantly to keep from sinking, but it doesn't, because its body is flooded with ammonium, a chemical that happens to be lighter than seawater. Its tissues are soaked in it, and that makes the whole animal almost perfectly weightless in the deep, able to hang motionless in the black water without lifting a finger. It's an elegant solution, but it's another chain binding it to home. Every part of this animal is tuned to the exact temperature, the exact pressure, the exact chemistry of its deep sea world. Now picture the trap closing. Suppose something goes wrong. A warm current pushes in from above. The squid gets sick or injured or disoriented and drifts upward. As it rises into warmer water, its blood begins to fail, and a failing squid is a weakening squid. It loses strength. It loses the power in its muscles. And the one thing it desperately needs to do, swim back down, back into the cold, back to safety, is the one thing it's now too weak to do. The warmth that's killing it is also stealing the strength it would need to escape the warmth. It's a one-way door. Rise too far and you cannot go back. The surface reaches up, pulls the giant squid the rest of the way, and holds it there while it dies. This is very likely why, again and again through history, giant squids were found drifting helplessly at the surface or washed up on shore. They weren't visiting. They weren't hunting. They were animals that had crossed a line they could never uncross, carried up into the warm and unable to ever get back down. And that is the grim secret behind the entire Kraken legend. Think about what it means for us. If a healthy giant squid can never survive the surface, if the only ones that ever reach the top are the dying and the dead, then every encounter humans ever had with this animal for centuries was an encounter with a corpse, or something close to it. The sailors who told stories of the Kraken, the villagers who found monstrous bodies on the beach, the whalers who sliced open a sperm whale and found enormous arms inside, none of them were seeing the giant squid as it truly lives. They were seeing its remains. They were reading the ending of a story they'd never witnessed the middle of. We invented a ship-destroying sea monster, one of the most terrifying legends in all of human history, and we built it entirely out of the bodies of an animal that had, in a sense, simply fallen out of its own world and died. The living giant squid, the real one, moving through the cold dark, hunting, breathing, alive, stayed completely hidden. Not because it was rare necessarily, and not because it was clever, but because it lived in the one place we couldn't reach, and it could never ever come to the one place we could. Which brings us to the third question, and to one of the great quests in the history of marine biology. If the giant squid can only live in the deep and only ever surfaces to die, then how do you see a living one? How do you find an animal that vanishes the instant it enters your world? For a very long time, the answer was, you don't. Marine biologists confirmed the giant squid was a real animal, not a myth, back in the 1850s, and then came the wait. Year after year, decade after decade, dead specimens kept turning up, hundreds of them. Bodies on beaches, bodies in nets, bodies in whales, and still no one had ever seen one alive. The years stretched into a full century and then nearly half of another. Roughly 147 years passed between the moment science named the giant squid and the moment anyone finally captured a living one on camera. The breakthrough came from a Japanese zoologist named Tsunemi Kubadera, who had become obsessed with the problem. He understood the animal's prison better than anyone, that he couldn't bring the squid up to him because bringing it up would kill it. So he did the opposite. He sent his cameras down to it, down into the cold and the dark, hundreds of meters below the surface, into the giant squid's own world. He spent years at it, trip after trip, lowering baited cameras into the deep off a chain of remote Japanese islands, waiting in the dark for something that might never come. And then, in 2004, it finally happened. His equipment, nearly a kilometer down, captured a living giant squid attacking the bait, its huge arms unfurling in the black water. For the first time in human history, we had an image of the Kraken alive in its home, behaving like the predator it truly is. Not a corpse, not a legend, a living animal. 2 years later, in 2006, his team managed to draw a live one up toward the surface to film it, and here the whole story comes full circle and confirms everything we've said. Because as they pulled that squid up out of the cold and into the warmth, it did exactly what a giant squid at the surface always does. It died. Even then, even with a team of the world's leading experts who understood precisely what was happening to it, who wanted more than anything to keep it alive, the surface still claimed it. The animal simply cannot survive up here, no matter how gently it's brought. And it wasn't until 2012 when Kubadera descended in a submersible almost a kilometer beneath the waves that humans finally filmed a giant squid fully alive in its natural deep sea habitat, a shimmering gold and silver creature moving through the dark, exactly where it belongs, exactly where it can never leave. And so we're left with something that turns the entire Kraken legend inside out. For centuries, we imagined the giant squid as a monster of the surface, a beast that rose from below to terrorize the world of light, to smash our ships and drown our sailors. But the truth is almost the exact opposite. The giant squid is not a monster that invades our world. It is a prisoner of its own. It lives its entire life sealed in a narrow band of freezing black water, hunted from below by the sperm whale, and sealed from above by an invisible ceiling of warmth it can never pass through and live. Between the whale and the warm water, it drifts through the dark, and of those two deaths, it is not the whale it can never escape. It's the sky. The most feared sea monster in human history spends its whole existence fleeing the one place we always imagined it came from. It was never coming up to get us. It was down there the entire time, in the cold and the black, doing everything in its power to stay as far from the surface as it possibly could. Because for the giant squid, the surface was never a hunting ground. It was always the end. If you want to meet the one hunter that can follow the giant squid down into that freezing dark, the sperm whale, and the brutal, scarring battles the two of them have fought in the deep for millions of years, that's the story we're diving into next.